So both Menglin and I are part of an enterprise analytics team. It's a central analytics organization where our objective is to, Menglin, and you tell me if you agree with this, is to develop advanced analytics solutions for the bank, right? And so what we want to do today is share a little bit about what we do. Maybe share a very high-level couple of projects. I'm going to ask Menglin a few questions about some of the projects she's in, and then she's going to ask me some. And then we have half an hour. We're going to do 15 minutes of a conversation between us, and then 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience.
Sounds good.
So Menglin, you head the Center of Excellence for Text Mining, which for Wells Fargo is a very kind of new kind of technology, new kind of analytics. Walk us through a couple of the challenges that you've had, some of the things that you found that are kind of have made your projects more successful. Obviously, every time you work in an organization like Wells Fargo that is such a large organization, with so many different groups and so many different stakeholders and so many different levels of knowledge of analytics, like walk us through how that works out.
Sure. Thanks, Mauro, for teeing it up. So my name is Menglin Cao, and I manage the Text and Speech Analytics Center of Excellence for the enterprise. It is, Mauro, you're absolutely right. It's a relatively new concept. Historically, things are being done manually. And I don't have to say to this room of audience, right? There are much better things that you can do, you can deploy to do what historically has been done. But for things that are happening with the, in banking industry, the push for advanced analytics is almost, it feels like a two-way street. What do I mean by that? I mean that there has to be a recipient on the other end, opposite from where we sit, and saying, yes, I think this makes sense, and I'm going to give you all the support, including staffing, including resources, including money, and advocacy, and everything else for you to be successful. And for us, I'm speaking from an analytic perspective, from a practitioner's perspective, it feels like everything that we need to do, it's very simple. We just need to come up with that solution, right? However, in reality, it's rarely that simple, and some of the challenges that I've seen. So give you an example as to what some of the things that we've been doing. In general, what we're trying to do is to replace or reduce the level of manual effort when it comes to unstructured data. Unstructured data meaning customer feedback. Unstructured data meaning image files. Unstructured data meaning customer survey or Twitter information. So all of these unstructured data where you could not use a standard SQL-like language to query them, and you have to read them previously. Now we are coming up with various different ways. For this audience, I'm sure you're all very, very experienced with RNN, recurring neural net, with long short-term memories, all of those stuff. But how do we make sure that these type of concept and message were bought in by the businesses? And that's critical component in terms of ensuring our success. One thing that I realize is this. My team, I'm speaking on behalf of my team, right? My team, extremely, extremely talented people. But I have to, sometimes I see that as an analyst, the thing that drives us is the intimacy with data. We like to talk to the data more than we like to talk to people. And the worst, this is not the worst thing. The worst thing is we like to speak to data more than we like to speak with people. So this is where the breakdown is. The great ideas that we have, we don't know how to communicate it to our business partners. And the reason being, we're not quite sure what motivates our business partners. And I think that's the number one important thing for us to understand and to take away. How do you find out what keeps them at night? How do you make sure that you are able to articulate what you're coming up with to convince them that you are going to solve for what what keeps them at night? And this is by practice, right? There's really no such a formula and say, yes, if you abide by rules number 1, 2, 3, you're going to get to what you want. That's not rarely simple as that. But there are some of the things that we have discovered, at least our team has accumulated across and then discovered that there are some useful tips for us to take home with. Number one is this: be really, really good at what you do. So be the expert that you are when it comes to data and analytics. So you be able to tell from cradle to grave all the histories, all the steps that you own, and ensure that this is one story that you can tell, you can articulate. Doesn't matter who asks you. So that's number one. Number two is this: be able to tie what you're providing and your solution with the business strategies. Find out what the top 3 priorities from your business partner, and figure out a way to tie what you're driving for with those business priorities. So that's the number 2 thing. Number 3 is get buy-ins from people that are cross peers of yours. So normally this conversation doesn't happen. Here's an example. Salesperson usually takes 6 calls for a salesperson to get what they want. And the previous 5 iterations are not wasted. It's just building on relationships. Usually the 6th call is the one that gets you what you want. Same thing with building relationship with our business partners. Try and do it multiple ways. A is try to foster a great relationship with the brothers and sister teams of your analytic teams. That's number 1. Number 2 is be able to talk in small groups in terms of getting their buy-in, so that when they were asked of what you're doing, they will be able to speak on your behalf of what you're trying to drive at. And number 3 is periodically get check-in meetings with the people that you're supporting, your business partners, and trying to stay on the same page with what they're driving at. So these are some of the things that, Mauro, in my mind, are helping us getting through the challenging that advanced analytic team usually face in a bigger organization. What are some of your experience and observations?
Yeah, I'm going to give you guys an example, and I'll stop along the way to tell you what worked and what didn't. So one of the problems we were trying to solve is we wanted to build a Nestless product model for the organization. The objective of the model, as the name can tell you, is that we're trying to figure out in the next 3 months, out of all the products that we have, which one is best for you, and based on past activity. Now we wanted to solve a couple of things. One of them is obviously the problem of Nestless product, but we also wanted to test and show to the organization that artificial intelligence is real. And what I mean is real is that the performance of artificial intelligence could actually outperform the models that we already had. Mm-hmm. And that was key for us because in a large organization like Wells Fargo, where there's a lot of different groups that have different levels of skepticism about new things, different levels of knowledge about analytics, and yeah, you actually have a lot of folks that just pick up buzzwords and artificial intelligence being one, big data being another, and so on and so on. You have to be able to show to all those folks that what you're doing actually has value beyond what's already being done, because otherwise somebody will come up and say, well, why should we build a convolutional neural network if we could just build a logistic model, right, and get the same outcome? And so what we did is actually we set up the project in such a way that our first step was to build baseline models, mm-hmm. very simple logistic models. No offense to the logistic models here or elsewhere, to set up the baseline of performance. Mm-hmm. And then we actually built the convolutional neural network, and we set it up in such a way that we use the same data set, same time period, et cetera, such that we can actually compare the performance of the two. And we actually showed that the performance of the convolutional neural network was significantly more than the logistic model. What that allows us to do is, one, allow us to say to our stakeholders, like, the investments we need to make for artificial intelligence and models like this one have to go up, right? Mm-hmm. And something that we've been talking about quite a bit, but here's actual evidence, right? You can actually quantify, right? If you know that there's, I can't tell you exactly the percentage difference, but if you know there's X% difference between what you've been doing before and what you now are able to do, then you know that the investments that you need to make can be actually quite significant, mm-hmm. right? Because you can actually quantify the monetary impact of using models that outperform. They're able to correctly predict who's actually going to acquire a product if we actually market to them. Mm-hmm. So I think the moral of the story, if we can call it moral of the story here, is that when you start an analytic project, especially in a large organization like Wells Fargo, is to know ahead of time what are the kinds of questions that folks are going to ask you, what are the kinds of obstacles that people are going to put in front of you, and how to address them, such that when you actually present to executives, you anticipate the questions that you're going to have. Like, well, you know, we've been doing this for 20 years, right? And it's worked for us before. And you can say, absolutely, but now, here's what we can do, and here's a differential.
Yeah, yeah. So one other, I really like that point. One other point that I want to add to that is that sometimes it serves your best interest if you give the credit to the decision maker. Right? So the new idea that you came up with, if you are willing to let go that level of pride in you and give that credit to the people who are making the decision, the long-term goal actually will be easier achieved, right? Because you want a win-win situation. And this happens when we feel so proud of what we have achieved. We wanted to kind of rejuvenate in the bask of our glory and be really excited at solving a groundbreaking resolution. And we feel like, you know, letting it go and giving it to someone else is not going to help me long term. Sorry, but the reality is, it's not the case. I usually use the word hippo when I describe situations like such. Have people heard of the term hippo used in situations outside of zoology? What does it stand for?
It's the highest paid person in the office.
Similar, right? So the person said it's the highest paid persons in the office. I usually refer it to be the highest paid person's opinion. So that's what counts, really. In order for us to have a win-win situation, you want to convince that person that what you're delivering is exactly what they want. And somehow, you know, their recommendation or the brainstorming sessions that you had with them helped you come up with that idea. And that's exactly what they would want to make sure that this entire process is successful and you get all the support. So it will be it's a good lesson for everyone to take home with when it comes to how to best pave a road for you to become successful and for the business that you are helping to become successful.
I think that's a fantastic point. I'm reminded of a manager who would, one of the things that we do as analysts, especially when, in my team, there's a lot of folks that know quite a bit, and they have, PhDs in mathematics and statistics and everything, and that it's very easy to say, okay, I know how to solve the problem, and then you go off and you solve it, and you come back, right? And then so what we've sort of done that is a little different is exactly what you're saying, which is sometimes we bring the executives into even though we don't really need to do it in order to get the same answer, right? Sometimes it's you get them into a brainstorming session and then make them participants so that they feel more part of the answer once the answer is unveiled.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So as far as time, I think are we
Good. Another 10, 12 minutes. So move on to Q&A.
Okay. Good. So we'll open it up to questions from the audience. All right. So we'll start here or. So now we have one here at the front, one here on the side, one in the middle, and one in the back.
Hey guys, thanks for sharing. What do you look for when hiring a data scientist?
Great question.
It is a great question. It's usually when we look for, people always refer to good data scientists as unicorns, right? But obviously there's so many unicorns in the room, so you really can't
take a picture.
That's right. You really can't say that it's hard to find. So the things that I look in data scientists depending on what I want. Obviously, skill set has to match. So for me, my primary interest or primary focus has been on unstructured data. So it's text data, speech data, any skill sets related to understanding unstructured data, making unstructured data easier to comprehend, telling a story from connecting unstructured data with structured data. So obviously these are some of the hard skills that I'm looking for. Soft skill wise, I think this is all almost the same across the board. It's number one thing is I would say communication skills, right? You would have to answer data science. Like I said previously, I've been an analyst all my life, right? It hit me hard when I realized that I like to speak and talk and listen to data more than I like to with a human being. And I think that's the piece that we need to adjust ourselves to realize that other than be your maestro of your orchestrate and having the ability to orchestrate the data to speak and dance for you in a most graceful way, there is that step for you to communicate what you've done with the people who are making the decisions, with the people who are driving the business. And then if you don't have that bridge crossed, doesn't matter how beautiful your work is, it just doesn't get anywhere. So what I'm looking for is that level of articulation of your product and connecting that to the strategic priorities and be able to tell the story.
Yeah, I would say that on the technical side, we're absolutely looking mostly at the moment for folks with a machine learning background, more than the statistics. We have plenty of folks that have PhD in stats, so we are looking for folks that have had experience with convolutional neural networks and so on. I would say that and that's kind of like the baseline entry right now. I would say that I would love to have if they will allow me, and it probably won't allow me to do this when I interview someone, is to have a case study where the case study would be having the statistician or the machine learner talk to a very high paying executive, like the Hippo executive. Why? Because there's going to be, in your career, there's going to be lots of situations where you're going to be talking to someone that does not know analytics, right? But because they're very senior, they know a lot of things. Or some of them like to believe they know a lot of things, right? And that's okay. I mean, that's just part of human nature. And so how you handle the questions that he or she might ask you that are not necessarily in your mind good questions is really what's going to make or break your career,
yes.
Right? Because you are likely to know more than everybody else in the room, but you don't want to be the guy who, and I've had some of these in my team in the past, where if an executive asks questions, you can tell from the body language that the person does not think that the questions are very good ones, right? And so you have to actually then learn, our ideal ones is the ones that, and by the way, this is because, the reason for that is because most of the engagements that you'll encounter in your career have to do with consulting. You are consulting with somebody else to give them an answer, right? And sometimes they won't like the answer, and sometimes they don't like the method, and so you have to be able to navigate that in a way that leaves them feeling like, okay, not only does he know, but I also know. Like, he answered my questions very well, right?
Yes.
So that's a great question is often a very effective response. I got it.
Exactly.
I like it.
That was a great question, by the way.
Yeah, so you talked about neural networks and CNNs. So so with neural networks, you might get really good results, but you may not be able to exactly reason why you got the results. So in a traditional industry like banking, how do you convey this to your stakeholder?
You can take that one.
Do you want to take that one? Sure.
So I'm glad you asked that question because
good question.
Actually, these are really good questions. Let's try to be polite. So one of the challenges, I think this is probably happening in all sort of the traditional industries, right? Where as a regular industry, every model that we create has to go through legal compliance. We have to go through every single variable, right? Because of the evolution that has happened in the last 5 years or less around CNN and a lot of the sort of the neural network techniques. We have been piloting, we just started piloting some of these, especially like the model that we built is actually one of the pilots, where we're saying, okay, you should no longer look at hundreds of variables, because you can't, right? It's impossible, for you as an organization, you have to hire like tons of lawyers to look at, 1,000 variables, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to pilot a way of saying, don't look at the variables, and obviously we'll take out like the usual ones that we can't use, but then look in the back end, in the middle of the campaign, to see how we're doing when it comes to certain kinds of protected classes, right? This is a very early pilot, but that's really the only way that traditional companies are going to be able to get around some of that. And not get around, but actually be able to get to the same outcome, right? But being able to use some of these new techniques. It's a great question. And
yeah.
It's very challenging, right?
It is.
The power of a CNN model is that you just throw, hundreds of variables at it, right?
Yeah, sometimes thousands. So I would add that the door or the constraints for financial industries to adopt a newer approach while at the same time meet regulatory and risk compliance are gradually opening, right? So you will be, when you enter several years ago, you wouldn't be able to do it. You wouldn't be able to have schedule a call with your risk and compliance and your legal partners to discuss this conversation, because it's just so complex and beyond what we are comprehending at that time. But now the door is opening. So the parties that you will need to work through to get these approvals actually have a change of mind as well. So it's really going into a very good direction.
Right. And just to clarify, the outcome should be the same, which is that we do not, under any circumstances, use certain kinds of variables that would potentially have biases that are, outside of what we want a bank or any organization to have. So pilot, very early on.
If there's a couple of questions on the other side of the room, then I'll go to the gentleman at the back. So let's go halfway down the middle. Yes, thank you.
Hey, so can you tell us briefly about the structure of the Center of Excellence? Do you do org-wide initiatives on your own, or do you do consulting for different teams? And if you do that, do you embed your people in those different teams, or you bring in people from other teams to work with you to get the domain knowledge?
Yes. So because the text analytics and speech analytics is relatively new, right? So instead of having all the teams, all the lines of business invest in the skill sets or invest in the architecture that support this skill set, the enterprise has made a decision and say, to create center of excellence. For example, there are AI initiatives. If anything related to machine learning or natural language processing needs to happen within the umbrella of artificial intelligence. And my team is serving as the kind of the data science arm for this organization. Say if there's any internal need for data science when it comes to natural language processing, NLP, natural language understanding, text and speech, come to us and let's work together.
There was a question at the center at the back there. Thank you.
Thank you. So Wells had some tough PR times in the last year or so because of some historical business practices. But I'm kind of curious, which I know are largely related to incentives and things. But have you seen that change the kind of discussions that you get with people talking about perhaps the unintended consequences of analytics projects and the ethics around that? Have you seen any of that kind of come across to your side of things?
I would say that what we are working on now is to come up with almost a 360-degree of check and balance to ensure that things that happened in the past would no longer happen in the future. Whether it's beefing up our compliance policies, whether it's engaging analytic team to help out where they historically didn't play a role or an important role. So I think this is the entire kind of enterprise. The objective for that is to make sure that we don't fall at the same place as we did in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely there's been lots of organizational changes within the company in order to make sure that things like that don't happen. But from the analytics point of view, what we are doing is having discussions about how do we use things like machine learning and CNN and things like that to actually monitor all the activities that we think can potentially result in things that we might not want, right? So the sales practice is a clearer one, right? There are things you can do from an analytics perspective that we're going to do. This is a very early stage as well to say, okay, how do we monitor so that any kind of activity that it's a little ordinary we can actually flag, right? But then that's just one, and you can argue from an analytics perspective that that's in the past, therefore like it won't happen again. You still want to set it up, but then the other questions become really interesting are, well, what are all the other areas, right? Where analytics, we get all this hundreds of thousands of variables that we have, not that much, but thousands of variables that we have, can actually start automatically monitoring activities, right? There's almost like you could have a center where you have all of these models running all the time, seeing if there's any activity that looks out of the ordinary. So I think there's an incredibly power with a lot of sort of the new techniques and a lot of the new algorithms to be able to do that.
I think the other thing that's good for analytic community is that before maybe the concept of bringing analytic community or analysts into a into a defensive type of effort, especially when it comes to compliance, right, may not be that obvious or that apparent. These days, after we see the benefit of machine learning, AI, deep learning, all of these, and people, it's kind of the wave of the advanced analytic evolution has been pushed, or open eyes for executives to see, okay, these are the areas that I see the analysts can play an important role, helping me get to where I want to be.
Okay, take one final question. Are you good? All right, well, yeah, you can take the final question. Let's get a mic up there. Thank you.
So yeah, you mentioned about the next-based engagement or the next-based action, and how you had a baseline logistic model and a AI model. So my question is, how do you know that your AI model is actually doing better and not your logistic regressionist model is doing bad? Like, you're just measuring the difference, right? It just could be that your AI model is just doing nothing, but your logistic regression model is actually doing bad, like, or it's overfit or something.
Right. No, it's the way we do it is like the logistic model, the performance of the logistic model was what we would expect, right? The kind of lift we got in the out of sample data set was what traditionally we see, right? So we knew the model was performing like all the other models that we have, right? So that was kind of the first baseline, right? Because to your question, it was like, one of the things that we did is we didn't want to spend like, just like a couple of days on the logistic and then like months on the AI model, because then it wouldn't be fair. So we actually did have folks working on it to make sure that it was performing like all the other logistic models, like more or less, right? So that at least gives you some confidence that that the model's not like performing less. And then you compare the same data set basically and a lot of the same variables on the other one. And then you do the auto sample as well, similar auto sample, and then you see, okay, now are you performing much better? So it really was that, right?
Okay, great. And with that, thank you very much, Mauro. Menglin, thank you.